I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. This week I'm speaking to Sue Allen of Microbz, which produces and distributes probiotics for gardens. The concept of probiotics in gardens is new to me, but it dovetails nicely with previous episodes looking at soil health and mycorrhizal fungi. So I was delighted to speak to Sue and to find out more about how probiotics work in gardens and what we can do to encourage them. I started by asking Sue about what goes on at Microbz.
Well, here at Microbz, we produce and distribute beneficial microbes, which can be useful in any environment. I mean, soils, plants, definitely human health, animal health, even cleaning our homes. I mean, basically, microscopic creatures, which have been around for billions of years, it turns out are fundamental to health in any environment. So we're really, I guess we feel privileged, to be honest, to be working with this new technology, which has only come to the fore, I suppose, in this century, and I'm sure will be more and more needed.
So what are microbes? Could you just give an overview?
Yes. Microorganisms are invisible, generally. I mean, except for one or two, which happen to be, huge, gigantic, but for microorganisms. But generally, they're invisible creatures that have been around for billions of years. I mean, if the Earth is 5 billion years old, then microbes, they were around from about 4 billion years ago. And they really are the first form of life on Earth. Eventually, they covered the whole Earth with a sort of mantle of different species. And it's from them that all the rest of life has evolved, because they created the conditions for bigger life, oxygen, carbon, and so on and so forth. So they're ancient forms of life which underpin everything else. I mean, if you look at the soil food web, it really starts with microorganisms. They are the first level on the food chain, because even nematodes, all the sort of little creepy crawlies in the soil and so on, they all start with the food, which is microbes. It turns out that microbes are really good at closing the cycle of life, which is something that we humans have definitely not been very good at, hence all our waste and so on. But if you think about the cycle of life, introducing microbes in the soil will help the quality of the food. If you introduce microbes in the actual food, even where it was grown and the plants on top of the soil, it benefits that. And then, of course, it helps the humans and the animals that eat food, that eat the microbes. And then their residues, our residues and waste, then go back into the soil and help the soil again. So microbes, it turns out, have the intelligence to know when it's time to decompose and to degrade organic matter back to its constituent parts. And then when it's time to regenerate by bringing some of those constituent parts together again to create and sustain new life. And they are not wasteful at all. As I said, a lot of the soil is actually consists of dead microorganisms. They're being continually recycled. That's what they're good at, recycling. And we have a lot to learn from them, I think.
And why don't we know more about them? Is it just because they're so small?
It's partly because they're so small, so that it's only been in the last 20 or 30 years that we've had the microscopic technology to really look at them, to watch them, to see how they behave. There are apparently, they extrapolate about 1 billion different species of microorganisms. It's obviously never going to be possible to catalogue them all because they're all evolving all the time. So by the time you got to the end, you'd only have to start again. They're in symbiosis, so they collaborate, they work with each other. And again, therefore, it's difficult to say from one strain of bacteria exactly what it does, isolated from every other strain that it comes into communication with. So it's a very complicated and beautiful system of degrading organic matter, basically, and closing the circle of life, degrading organic matter, and then regenerating new life. That's basically what the microbes do.
So you mentioned their presence and their importance in the soil. Is that the main role that they play in gardens?
Yes, I would say that is the main role they play in gardens, although, of course, there are microbes on the surfaces of plants and fruits and so on, but it all starts with the soil health, because they deliver nutrients to the plants. It turns out that how healthy they are, it also determines, of course, how healthy the plants, the fruits, the vegetables are, even to the point of human health. I mean, there's big studies that show that there's a community in Germany where the children get far fewer levels of allergy and asthma and so on, where they've really isolated the fact that living in the country in a natural environment can make your immune system stronger and make you more resilient to allergies and so on as a human. So soil microbes play a huge part in not just plant health, soil health, but human health as well.
How do they work?
Microbes basically, as I say, single cell invisible organisms. They absorb organic matter for energy. That's where they get their energy from. So, of course, as in the soil, the organic matter would be made up of waste, residues, and even dead microbes. I mean, a huge part of waste is actually, dead microorganisms. There's such a constant evolution. But they absorb that and their energy from waste matter, and they convert it into the decomposing matter or into generating the new possibilities for life. So they will get together with other microbes and they would deliver, the nutrients that a particular plant needs. They would, in our gut, of course, they get together and they deliver the nutrients that we need in our body and sort out our digestive health. So you could think of it as sort of soil digestive health in the same kind of way.
When you were talking about that, it made me think, so if you get dead microorganisms and the microorganisms are kind of, I presume, what's consuming stuff at the lowest level, what happens to the dead microorganisms? Is there something else below them that we've not yet found?
Well, who knows? There might be, because this, it's true. It is a really exciting new field of biology, which is in its infancy. I think there's going to be so much more to discover as we get better at isolating the different microbes and what their jobs are. They have isolated a few, but as I say, considering how many there are, it's an impossible task. But it turns out that the diversity of microbes, live and dead microbes, but diversity is really important. Where there's a more, homogeneous or less diverse microbial population, the soil is less healthy. Where it's really diverse, then the soil is more healthy. And of course, you can't actually see them. So there's a guy scientist in America who's got a scientific test. He calls it soil your undies. What he does to see how healthy the soil is, he buries a couple of pairs of underpants, and not very deep, a few inches deep, leaves it for 2 or 3 weeks, and then digs them up. And the one that is, the more decomposed it is, the more it falls apart. Basically, the healthier the soil is, the more the microorganisms, which eat cellulose anyway, have been, consuming, if you like, the undies. So that's his scientific basis for really trying to find out how healthy a soil is.
I'm envisaging pairs of pants being buried across the country. So you mentioned in an email to me the principle of dominance. Can you talk a bit about that? Yes.
Microbes are, it seems, work in a way that is, like I said, very collaborative. It turns out that we've been thinking that microbes are harmful. We kind of get all this press about pathogens and viruses and so on and so forth. But in the whole spectrum of microbes, there's a very, very small percentage that are harmful. And likewise, at the other end of the spectrum, there's a very small percentage that are purely beneficial. And all the rest in the middle, they call sort of opportunistic. And what it means is that if an environment tips towards the pathogen, then a lot of the other microbes will go in that direction on the grounds that that's the strongest sort of area. But if you can tip an environment in another direction, in the more positive, beneficial microbes direction, then all the ones in the middle will go in that direction. And then you'll have it doesn't take much to really create a healthy environment, and it doesn't take much to create a disastrously unhealthy one. So, for instance, you could even think of the pandemic that's going on at the moment. I mean, there are steps that we can take to really minimize the ones in the middle, the opportunistic ones, really catching hold, or multiplying, if you like, the harmful ones. But we are learning more and more about it. So the dominance is important. If you can get the beneficial microbes in the majority on that end of the spectrum, you will maintain a healthy environment, whether that's in soil, on a plant, or as I say, or in an animal or human.
Yeah. And why would we have a balance of more good or more bad? What's the kind of the status quo? What would disrupt it to be one way or the other?
That's a really good question. Lots of things disrupt it. One of the things that disrupt the balance is, of course, pollutants, environmental pollutants. I mean, microbes find it hard to deal with a lot of the pollutants that are around. They're evolving. I mean, they found a microbe that actually eats plastic, but it's going to take a long time to, get anywhere with the amount that we've produced. But the pollutants are harmful and will tip the balance that way. Of course, if there's a pest or disease around, then that can also multiply quickly, as we know in our gardens, which is why the basic health of the soil at the microscopic level is so important to build resilience, and then those pests don't get a chance to get such a hold in that environment if there's already a robust, healthy plant or healthy soil. One of the things that microbes do, they're really good antioxidants. And of course, our world is very oxidized. A lot of the pollutants create the free radicals, which then are less stable in a soil. And so the microbes are also very good at producing antioxidants. In fact, there is one that they've found which is especially designed for that, to be the sort of antioxidant. And they've been following that and found that if they can nurture that particular microbe, which is principally by not ploughing the soil, you get many more antioxidants in the soil if you don't plough and disrupt what's already an amazing web in the soil. And the good microbes get to be much more dominant there as well.
Yeah, I think this does come up quite a bit in no dig, so that's interesting. Another two terms that you mentioned to me, which I know the kind of basic meanings of them, but not probably in terms of microorganisms. Can you mention fermentation and collaboration?
Yes. So fermentation is really interesting because microbes are very good at fermenting, which is the kind of opposite of putrefying. You get a bad smell, something's really off, it's putrefying, it's rancid, it's not a healthy smell. And fermentation is where the microbes, instead of going down the putrefaction route, which is usually where there's an overbalance of pathogens, as we would say, if they can get into the decomposing part of what they do, without being too overwhelmed, they get to decompose, and then there's less methane, there's less toxins released. Suddenly you're on the scale of the good decomposing material, which produces much more carbon, much more helpful for things for life to regenerate. So fermentation is a really important part of what they do. And in fact, that's one of the things that we do. We ferment the liquids, the bacteria that we produce, and that fermentation itself also produces, first of all, more bacteria, more microorganisms, but secondly, a healthy environment with even more enzymes and vitamins, because that's what fermentation does. It seems to add value in ways that, a lot of people don't completely understand, to be honest. Why does sauerkraut have 7 times more vitamin C than regular cabbage just because it's been sitting in salt water for a while? That's what happens.
Would we see that principle at play in our compost heaps, or is that not the right environment for that?
Oh, absolutely. Microorganisms enhance the acceleration of composting. So we regularly spray compost here with microorganisms, and it breaks down faster, definitely.
And what's the collaboration part of it?
They manage to communicate with each other, microbes, and we've actually seen, some people have seen it in the lab, where they kind of meet up with each other, and they seem to pass a piece of information literally through the cell wall from one to another. Now, we don't know what that information necessarily is, but it could be, for instance, don't go in that direction because there's pesticides there. It could be anything. They are communicating creatures, and they often collaborate with each other to achieve health, so that one microbe will be the photosynthesizer perhaps, and the next one will be the one that then delivers the particular nutrient to the plant, and they'll pass it on to each other. There's not one microbe that does all of it, They divide up the jobs and they collaborate with each other to make the whole thing happen. As I say, this is an infancy in terms of understanding exactly how it works in the whole spectrum of health, but people are being able now gradually to see more and more of how that symbiosis works.
Yeah, well, there obviously is some sort of groupthink going on if they're all doing the, follow the strongest leader thing. So, as you said, if the pathogens take over, then the rest of the middle of the herd kind of follow. There's obviously some communication going on, but as you say, not quite sure how that happens yet. But
yeah, exactly. and I think part of the you asked earlier, why didn't we know all of this before? I think one of the things that we've been conditioned to think is, that we've got to kill all known germs, and we do that in our houses, and we do that. Over the last couple of 100 years, it's definitely been, get rid of them kind of thing, not work with them, not understand them, not how can we enhance nature rather than control it. Because I think we need to accept that they do seem to have an intelligence where this is kind of built in, this kind of collaboration, this kind of symbiosis, this kind of creation of life, and we can trust it because they do know what they're doing. Left to their own devices, they'd be fine. But without them, we'd be in trouble.
Yeah, well, they've had 4 billion years to practice, I suppose. So
exactly. Exactly.
So why is it important to have them in the soil in terms of plant nutrition? Are they relevant to that?
Oh, definitely, because they are the ones that, as I say, that deliver if a plant needs nitrogen, the plant will communicate that somehow. They secrete this necessary, this need, and it's the microorganisms that will deliver it, and not magnesium, because they might not need magnesium at that particular time or in that particular location. And of course, they also feed our food for, as I say, for the nematodes, and then for the spiders and the ants and the birds, and on it goes for the whole of the food web. So I'm convinced. I think they sound amazing. I think I need more of them in my soil. I don't think my underpants would be consumed to any sort of degree, actually, if I put them in the garden for 2 or 3 weeks. I think I'd dig them up and they would be pretty much as they went in. So if I decided I needed more of them, what kind of things can I do to encourage them into my garden? Of course, one of the things is to garden as naturally as possible, and certainly lots of organic matter. They need organic matter to thrive and for their own energy. So all that, muck and magic is no accident. That's exactly what is necessary. We also produce solutions, and it's liquid microbes, which can be, put in the watering can, watered once a week, spray can, spray pack or whatever on the plants. That's what we do here, just to give them that extra boost and to counteract the pollution that is everywhere. I mean, even grass in the countryside shows signs of, car exhaust. If you dissect it, it's everywhere, and we need to be kind of doing as much as we can to help the microorganisms. They are also, they not only help the soil to hold water, they also help the soil to hold carbon. It's that intricate makeup of the soil that's actually going to be one of the biggest helps to the climate emergency that's right on our doorstep. So whatever we can do to increase the health of our soils through the diversity of the microorganisms that's in there, the better. Try not to use any chemicals, lots of organic matter, and the no-dig, however that works for you, but understand that with the mycorrhizal fungi and the bacteria in the soil, that's a complex web. Less we disturb it, the better.
Yeah. So you produce products. When you're producing them, how do you know that you're cultivating the good ones? Is it the way that you cultivate them?
Yes, it's partly the way we cultivate them, and also as I said, the vast, vast majority of microbes are beneficial, and they already exist in the soil. What we do actually is extract the beneficial microbes, from the soil, and we multiply them. That's basically what we do. It's actually quite a simple technology, but it's something which, has been shrouded in secrecy and so on. But hopefully one day it'll be something that's available to everybody, because we obviously send our products away to be tested as well. I mean, we know that they are full of the beneficial bacteria because of the testing. But the truth is that the beneficial bacteria, if you go out into the countryside, into relatively organic soil, that's where they are. And that's where they like to multiply and thrive. So if you can capture them, harvest them, multiply them, that's what we do. And then it's a liquid solution, which is totally natural, absolutely harmless for pets, children, anybody can drink it. And of course, really good for plants and soils.
So how is it different? I've spoken to people recently about mycorrhizal fungi, and you can buy that in a bag that you can sprinkle, or I think you mix it with water and then you sprinkle it on your plant roots before planting. Is it similar to what you're producing, or are there differences?
There are differences. I mean, from the organic matter, there's a two kind of strains, if you like. I mean, microorganism as an umbrella term includes fungi as well. But the bacteria are more, there are many more different species, if you like. The fungi is a kind of branch off of that. And we could do a powder, but the microbes are alive, and they thrive in water better than if you try to freeze dry them and, do a complicated procedure like that. So in water, that's a natural milieu, and they love it. And that's how I think is the best way to transport them and use them.
Yeah, because a few of the people that I've spoken to have kind of said you need to be careful what you're putting on, because, it might not still be alive by the time you mix it with water. And also you don't know exactly, if you're, for example, planting roses and you're applying a mycorrhizal fungi preparatory mix and there's no fungi in there that is symbiotic with roses, then it's a bit of a waste of time. So in terms of what you're producing, is it the case that because it's kind of broad brush, it will find a home and it will find is it at home in all soils, for example? If I've got a sandy soil, do I need a special strain, or do they just work on anything and everything?
Yeah, no, I think they work on everything and everything. I mean, we've got 15 strains of bacteria in our 15 families, and therefore many more actual, subgroups in our probiotic mixtures. And the truth is that it's like a soil or a plant will take what it needs, what it wants, and then sort of discard the rest. There's enough diversity in there for anything to benefit anything that needs it. And that's the kind of thing I think we need to really know, that nature knows best. That's such an old adage, isn't it? But nature does have a way of sorting these things out. If we give it as much abundance and diversity as we can, the rest of it, happens.
Thinking about back to the soil, obviously everything's going to take root in soil unless of course you're growing in water. I mean, is it still useful in that type of cultivation?
I suppose so. Yes, definitely. Oh, it would be. You mean in hydroponic cultivation? Yes, absolutely. It'd be useful there. Definitely, because of the nutrients that it puts into the water. I mean, I use it on my house plants, and I use it, when I've got cut flowers as well. I put a little bit in the water there. They last longer. They seem to go on for a few more days. It just gives them an extra boost of life.
Yeah, I was thinking about rooting houseplant cuttings in water, actually. So that, presumably that would have an application.
Definitely. I mean, you would want to make it quite a diluted mixture, not too strong, because the dilution seems to work well as well. But, experiment with it. I mean, I think it would definitely work. What I do when I sow seeds quite often is soak them in microbes overnight before I sow. And that really helps as well. We've done some studies with some group that we know in India. We've been helping them with using microbes. And when they dip the rice plants into the microbes and then plant them, they've sent us pictures of the difference in not only robustness, but also in height of and also in number of rice kernels, per plant. It's hugely different when they've used the microbes and when they haven't.
Yeah, fascinating. So you could spray your plant leaves, and I'm assuming that would make it less susceptible to attack by pathogens. For example, how does it perform, or have you trialled it with something like black spot on roses? Is it helpful in that sense?
Yes, we've been using it actually this summer particularly. We've got a new concoction that's not only microbes but also, cayenne and garlic and neem and so on, which deter pests. So that it works in two ways. First of all, it strengthens the plant, and I noticed that when I use the microbes sprayed in my watering can, perhaps once a week, the leaves just get thicker, they get greener, the plant is stronger. So adding the cayenne and the garlic can be a deterrent as well. Not only is the plant stronger, but the pests are just not so greedy for the green stuff on my plants, because it doesn't taste as good as maybe the one next door. So they hopefully go somewhere else. I think all that sort of thing can work, definitely. Thinking about myself selfishly, I don't mind the pests so much, but I would certainly, be interested in something that fought fungal diseases. So yes, and this would work on fungal diseases as well, because again, the fungus won't attack so strongly a plant that is already, robust and resilient. I mean, it's true. Sometimes we live in communities where something can take hold and it doesn't go, this garden is more strong than the next one. But we have had feedback. Somebody came last week saying she still had black fly on her broad beans, but when her neighbour came and said, "My goodness, what you've been doing, my black fly is a lot worse." Mm-hmm. So it can be one of those preventative things. You think, "Oh, I still haven't got rid of it," but it's not as bad as it could be if you hadn't been using beneficial microbes.
And presumably it just means that even if the pests do turn up, the plant's just that more resilient to deal with them. So
yeah,
it wouldn't
exactly.
be so devastating to the plant.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. Obviously, this is, I think, very much in its infancy, it's fair to say. Apart from your website, which I'll put links to in the show notes, can you recommend anywhere else people could go and find out more information. I mean, someone's just introduced me to Merlin Sheldrake's book, which is very much along these lines. So I'm currently listening to that. But are there any other, books or websites that you can recommend people go to just so they can find out more about it?
Yes, I mean, there's several books that I love. One of them is called Life at the Edge of Sight. I'm trying to think who wrote it, but it's a wonderful book about obviously the microscopic creatures and how they've evolved and how they affect our nutrition, our agriculture, our gardens, everything. So Life at the Edge of Sight is a great one. There's also, perhaps it's not so much about microorganisms, but, The Garden Jungle by David Coulson, I think it is. The Garden Jungle is basically about how, we can all have our own mini wildlife reserve in our garden. A lot of wildlife we can't even see, but knowing how precious and valuable it is part of it. There's if you to Google basically microbes in soil, you can even find YouTube videos about how to actually extract the microbes and create them, or multiply them. There's also bokashi. Do you know about bokashi? Bokashi it's a Japanese term, but it's like wheat bran, which has got microbes and molasses mixed up with it. And if it's in there for 2 or 3 weeks, it starts to ferment. And it's a really, really useful way to break down kitchen compost or any kind of compost, to add to any kind of compost, to really spread the microbes in. So looking at bokashi, ways to deal with kitchen waste will bring up all this kind of technology.
Or you could just chuck your sauerkraut on, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yes.
Which I made some at Christmas. When did I make it? Earlier in the year, and I looked at it and I thought it was, I don't know, I wasn't confident in my abilities, so I threw it away. But yeah, perhaps I should have put it on my compost heap.
Yes, definitely. I mean, kitchen waste is a whole other way to feed microbes in the garden. Really keep all the scraps of vegetables and so on, and then if you mix with bokashi, mix it with microbes, it even breaks down faster. But still, let it break down, and then add it to the soil. It gives that whole another range of diversity for sure. If you can stop, as long as you can stop the vermin getting to it, but it's a really useful way to feed the soil.
Preferably organic, or doesn't it matter?
Oh well, always preferably organic, but that's I think a kind of rule of thumb now, isn't it? The thing about chemicals is that they've helped a lot in many ways, but I think inadvertently we have started to compromise the health of our soils by all the chemicals that we've been using to increase crops and reduce pests and so on, because we've tipped the balance away from nature being able to regenerate these things herself. And now that you have to have use more and more pesticides to get the same results, more and more fertilizers to get the same results in agriculture, and it's just not sustainable.
No.
So we need to find something more sustainable, and of course organic is that.
Many thanks to Sue for taking part in the interview and explaining loads about microorganisms and probiotics. I've put links to Microbz, the books mentioned, and in case you don't want to Google soil your undies, there's a link to that experiment too in the show notes. Thanks to you for listening. Here's Dr. Ian Bedford talking about some of my favourite underpot dwellers.
Sometimes mistakenly called insects, woodlice are actually terrestrial crustaceans and are therefore related to lobsters, crabs and shrimps. There's over 30 different species of woodlice in the UK that we often refer to as pillbugs, sowbugs or slaters, and they're all easily recognisable by their shiny grey plated shells and 7 pairs of legs. The females will also have a pouch on their undersides, within which they carry and protect their eggs and young. When disturbed, some woodlice species roll themselves into a ball, like miniature armadillos, whilst others will just remain motionless. Woodlice are very common within our gardens, where they remain active for up to 3 years, feeding on dead and decaying plant material. Ecologically, they're an extremely important part of nature's food webs and an essential component of the nutrient recycling process. Despite the availability of products for killing woodlice, they rarely eat living plant material, so gardeners shouldn't have to consider them as plant pests. In fact, when they are found within the structure of a living plant, they're usually just sheltering or feeding on bits of decaying or dead leaf and stem tissue. However, large colonies of woodlice can often be found under logs and pots, where they might be considered a nuisance. So if they have to be removed, it's probably best just to sweep them up with an old dustpan and brush, then relocate them under a hedge, or better still, on the compost heap.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, Roots and All, Facebook, Roots and All UK, and Instagram, Roots and All Pod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.